Okay, good morning and welcome to our next video lesson. What I wanted to do today was to walk through a solution to test number 2. Okay, so even if you had no problem and ended up getting a good score on test number 2, it's probably still worthwhile to take a look at this because in some cases some students came up with some sort of alternative solutions than what I was expecting, but were still okay. Some students ended up giving me solutions I gave the full marks for, but I'm maybe a little less happy with the solution. But I let it go. And otherwise, of course, if you ended up not getting something to work, then you definitely want to sit here and work through the entire thing. So the way I'm going to run this video is I'm going to start with the starter code, and I'm going to walk through my decisions about what I'm up to through each of the steps. I would encourage you to go and actually do the implementation again, perhaps from scratch, just for some extra practice. And if not, at least go back and fix yours so that you do have a solution to all of the steps. Okay, so let's actually begin. Okay, so the idea was a small to-do application that you could go through and you could mark off a bunch of tasks as being completed. The things that I ended up leaving out, I left out the ability to add new things to the list because that just required a little bit more GUI work than what I was interested in. Okay, but I mean those types of things would certainly be good exercise to go off and try. Okay, so, well, let's get started. There may be a couple points here where I'll have to pause, so you may see some sudden cuts and I'll come back in. Okay, is because if I get interrupted with something, I think that's probably the easiest way. So I apologize in advance. This could end up being a bit of a lengthy video, but there will be points in here. I mean, feel free to pause whenever required. At the end, I'm going to ask you to add a few extra features to this as well. So as a result, this video may end up overlapping into the next class as well. Okay, all right, so let's get started. Okay, part number 1, get the data displayed. Now, the secret, of course, here is that I gave you some starter code where I had hard-coded some values last time. Well, in fact, even this time it was also hard-coded, but the previous time I had actually put in some stuff inside the load data where I was actually calling new for the different types of tasks. But of course, this time at the style of say the stuff that we did with the invoicing problem, which was the hint about why I said go off and look at the invoicing.js, is I've given everything in the CSV format. And you may say, well, why didn't you just give it to us in an easier format? Well, trust me, sometimes when you get data out of a system, like you don't really know what format it's coming in. Comma separated values, very, very common format. There's a handful of other formats that may come from other systems, because remember, although it's being hard-coded here, there's sort of no guarantee it would actually be hard-coded in a CSV format somewhere else. For example, a better place that this would come from would be some internet server where you log in and you get all of these tasks. This is something I'm actually going to do next week because I think it's important that you've been through this process. Okay, so we know we've got this function here called get task data, and somewhere down here in this load data, I even left this function right here, a call to it saying let raw be equal to get task data, and I left a comment in here saying, well, your job is to actually pull this stuff out. Now, a couple of things about this. You see what I've done here is most of the tasks have the following format. In position number 0, that looks like it's the due date. Okay, so let's actually mark this down. We'll call this the due date. We know that in position number 1, this is actually the task name. In position number 2, that looks like it's the type of task. And you can see from the type of task, I've got this thing here called a no delay and irregular. Recurring, I've left commented out for right now because they don't quite fit the other formats. Number 3 happens to be the priority, and number 4 looks like it is the completion date, or it's the word incomplete, which means it hasn't been done yet. Okay, so these recurring tasks, however, have this extra thing here in this position, so that's going to be dealt with a little bit later, and that's why I said leave it commented out for right now. Okay, so let's take this, and you know what? I'm going to take these comments that I just wrote, and I'm going to paste the thing down here so I don't have to keep scrolling up and up and back each time. Okay, so let's actually go and try to solve this. Okay, number one. Yeah, you have no choice. You have to go through. You have to iterate through the entire array full of raw values. So well, let's do it. So let row of raw be the following. Now, just like any other time, if you want to, you can always start by doing a console.log row to make sure that you've got at least something working. So in fact, let's start with this. Okay, so those are the individual rows. Okay, so at least everything is being printed out one at a time. Of course, the format is it's not exactly in the right format. Probably what we're going to need to do is to have ourselves an array. Well, let's take the row and we'll call split because this is what we had done before. All right, and finally console.log data. Okay, so same thing as before. Now you can see what I've done is I've got this as an array. Okay, because now that I've got it into the individual parts, now I can start doing some stuff with them. Okay, so what can I do with them? Well, we're going to start off with something very simple. We're just going to we're just going to create ourselves a new task. Okay, so now, task IDs come with an ID number. Okay, well, what ID number? Okay, you know what? Just let me put a -1 here for a second. I'll be right back in a second to deal with that. The task name. Well, the task name, according to this little table I built up here, this is going to be data 1. Oh, you know what? While I'm thinking about this, somebody asked me to make the font a little bit bigger. So page size. Let me see if I can find this. Sorry, I should have done this earlier. Oh, so here we go. Font. Controls of font. Let me make it 20 pixels. I hope that's going to be big enough. Okay, so that's quite a bit bigger. I hope that's big enough for everybody now. Okay, so hey guys, I'm not sure exactly what happened here. It looks like the microphone got muted and it got muted for a very long time, so really sorry about this. I'm going to try to record a little bit because I really don't want to go back and try to get exactly the same thing done again. So I'm going to leave the video as it is and I will try to annotate at least a few of the things but what I've done, but I'm not sure if I'll remember exactly what it is that I was doing at this point, but at least you can watch through as I'm going. But I know there's 2 or 3 spots here where I wanted you to pay some close attention, but it's kind of like I'm watching it and trying to narrate what's going on at a completely different time. So let's see how this goes. All right, so you can see what I'm up to right now is I'm trying to get the marking of the task completion. And okay, so we load this thing up. You'll see now, of course, I'm using the word incomplete because that happens to be the string. But really, it's the case that completed things should actually be the word undefined. So not the string undefined, but actually the value undefined. Okay, so you can see here I've gone through and I've added up an actual check to see whether or not something was the word incomplete, and if it wasn't, then I'll actually hang on to the value. Okay, otherwise we get the default value, and of course now this has got the problem solved a little bit. Okay, it looks like what I'm after next here is to deal with the individual task ID. Now, some people went through and they set up some counters, and they used the number 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and that's fine, but you can see that I'd actually left this thing called current TID, and I happen to start it off at the number 10. So rather than using some other numbers, I've decided what I'm going to do is use this current TID, but of course, just after I use that TID, I'm going to take TID++. So that's like an auto increment or sequence if you happen to be taking the database course at the moment. Okay, and you can see now that the tasks have at least got different IDs, starting from 10 up to 14. And obviously, if we add more things, then we would end up with 15, 16, 17, so on. Okay, so now I have to wait and see what comes next. Okay, and obviously I must have done something and realized that absolutely nothing was being displayed. Of course, now after being through this, I realized that there were some other issues. Okay, so I'll wait and just let you see what mistake I ended up making. Okay, hopefully you guys end up learning how to use the debugger through this course because this turns out to be very, very useful. So you see, I've set up a breakpoint, trying to track down whether or not I've ended up somewhere, so at least it's made it that far. Okay, and I'll probably clear the breakpoint and continue on. Okay, so obviously that was not the problem, but now I'm starting to look a little bit closer into here. Okay, so set a breakpoint inside the show on grouped and see whether or not this is working. And of course, what I would normally do is I would step through a couple of steps and see whether or not I've gotten inside the task list. And I suddenly said, oh, wait a minute, that task list happened to have absolutely nothing in it. Okay, so that was my realization because, of course, well, you actually need to add each of those tasks into the task list. So that was the thing that was missing. Okay. So here it is, and of course we use a push. So finally push the task into the list and voila, now we can actually see everything. Okay, so probably the next thing that I would have done would have been to start worrying about the actual task completion. Okay, so let's see if this is what I ended up doing. Okay, back here. So hey, look at this. So it's part number 2, deal with the completed functionality. Okay, so you can see you can put the checkboxes here, but of course nothing is actually happening. So I mean the checkboxes are completely independent of everything else. Okay. Okay, but you can see that I've already had this handle checkbox set up already, and I did that for you. And that happens to be called handle checkbox, which I would call app.completeTask with the task ID number. So I've looked after the TID number for you. And all that I would have done up here, here's my complete task. I would have just done a console.log just to make sure that this function was actually working because it's a good thing to start with because if you can't see anything appearing, you don't know whether or not you've got a mistake here or if it's hiding somewhere else. Okay, so probably at this point I would have saved everything, reloaded the page, okay, and cleaning up a couple of console.logs. Okay, and okay, so it says that it is being done, but of course nothing is actually happening yet, but at least we know that the event handlers are working. But of course we want that line to go through. Well, it turns out I've actually given you lots of functionality for this. In fact, it's very simple because all we need to do is go off and find the task in the list. So we've got this full task list, and of course, well, I want to use the word find. So we're going to search for T. Okay, I call the task. So T is going to be the local value for my find function. I'm going to ask if T's TID happens to be equal to the parameter called TID. If it is, well then I must have the actual task that I'm looking for. And of course, one final time, let's actually check in and make sure. So you can see in this case, I did manage to get back the task called buy petrol. Okay, so now the only thing to do is to actually mark the thing. Okay, and of course, well, if you remember, I've actually given you this function called mark complete, and mark complete takes, okay, let me scroll it around, here we go. Mark complete actually takes a completion date. Okay, but I've also given you this nice little function called current date, which happens to return the current date today in exactly the right form. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to call the function current date. Okay, so this time, now what I've done is I've console.log, and you can see the completion date is now set. And if I type out the global variable called app and take a look, you'll see now that the buy petrol actually does have a completion date, which it wouldn't have had beforehand. Okay, but of course the only thing is it's still not updating anything. And of course the magic happens because I provided you a function called show list that you can call just whenever you want to. And this looks after putting the cross through, okay, because it just adds the right type of class. Okay, but of course the thing is that you can't get rid of it because, well, it's kind of like a one-directional thing. So I mean, really, you don't want to be always marking it complete. You want to be marking it complete only if it happened to be incomplete in the first place. Okay, so see what I've done here. Okay, I'll have to wait for me to finish because I can't remember exactly which way you put. Okay, so what I've decided to do is I've got this function called if it is complete. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the function called mark incomplete, and if it wasn't, then I'll call mark complete with the current date. All right, so now we should have the desired behavior that if you put a checkbox, it goes, you take a checkbox away, everything is cleared. Okay, of course, now I have no idea what I was up to, so we'll have to wait and see what next section. Okay, we're off to the TID and name sort. Okay, I'm hoping that this was more or less a pretty easy gift for you because we've done this type of sorting before. The TID is quite simple. The name is a little bit more complicated. Okay, so once again, yes, I'm going to make use of the task list sort function. Okay, and of course the way we're going to sort it. Remember that sorting takes a function with two parameters. Often I call it T1 and T2. And if you remember the way how this works, normally if T1 is bigger than T2, you'd return a positive number. If they happen to be equal, you'd return a 0. And if it's negative, you'd end up returning a negative number. It doesn't really matter which one. So here I am demonstrating what you could do, but of course none of these are correct. And in the end, what I ended up falling back to was this magic little trick that I showed you called T1's TID minus T2's TID. Okay, so that's what I end up doing here. Now, unfortunately, I can't really check this one at this point because it's already sorted according to TID, so I have to do the sort name as well. So now you just have to do exactly the same thing here with the names, but of course you can't do T1 dot task name minus T2's task name because you can't subtract strings. That doesn't make any sense, but if you could, it would be fine. But instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to rely on a function called local compare. Okay, so what on earth does local compare mean? Okay, well, the word compare means that you're comparing two strings, and what it does is it returns either a positive, negative, or 0 result, depending on how things compare. The word locale has to do with the fact that everything in this particular language is being ordered according to ASCII. But of course, if you get into a different language, then everything ends up changing in a little bit of a different way. So that's why we have to have this extra word here called locale. And there is no compare, but that's what the word locale means. Okay, so I'll give it a second. I believe that the next thing up should end up doing a small demonstration of actually trying this. So I'm probably going through the explanation right now about what locale is. Okay, so reload it, and of course everything is still working. We'll try the sort by ID, which of course is already sorted. Sort by name, you can see everything starts from B up to P. Okay, so that's exactly what we want. And hopefully I click on sort task by ID and it goes back as it was. So there's our two things. Okay, so back to the Word document, and oh, the favorite part, procrastination. I thought everybody would really enjoy procrastinating, because I'm sure that you are probably procrastinating even at home. You should be doing schoolwork, but I mean, who wants to do schoolwork when there's lots of cool YouTube videos to watch? I mean, besides my YouTube videos, because I'm sure this is not that much interesting. Okay, so in this case, we're talking about going through and adding 1 to each of the days. Okay, so let's see, where are we going? Oh, okay, so this is an important thing. Do you notice that here inside this class task that there's something called procrastinate? Okay, right there. And now you got to remember what this is for. You see, inside the task procrastinate, that is for one thing. Now, I actually got questions about this during the test because there was also another procrastinate function down here in the to-do app. Okay, now you have to remember the procrastinate in the to-do app means to procrastinate everything. The one that's up above Okay, the one that's, okay, I guess I'm not going there. The one that's up above is actually just for a single task, okay, which I'm sure is just what I just said. So you got to remember that inside a task, you can't do stuff like this. So I actually had students go through the list and try to add one to a date, but guess what? There's absolutely no list inside here. The only thing inside this task is one TID, one task name, one due date, and one priority, and one completion date. Okay, it is not a list of things. In fact, there I am. I'm highlighting it has exactly one of these. It does not have a list of a bunch of these things. The function down below in the to-do app has all of these things. The only thing you can do here is simply procrastinate one task, the task. Okay, so down here, wow, I wish I knew what I was saying. Okay, here we go. So down here in the procrastinate, this is the place where you'd probably want to go through and actually procrastinate everything. And what I've decided this time is I'm going to use one of those map functions. At least I'm pretty sure I'm going to use a map function. You could use the for each, you could use a for loop. Okay, and what I've done is I've gone through and I said, okay, let's let t do something. Well, we want to start off by messing around with this due date. Now, one thing that I could do is I could do something like this, where due date is equal to due date plus 1. But of course that doesn't work. But there is this function called add days. But I'm also not interested in doing it here because really I've got this function above called procrastinate. So all that I'm going to do is I'm just going to call t's procrastinate function. Okay, oh, and that's it. Now, of course, I do need to show the list. Okay, good. At least I remembered this time. Okay, so this is what the procrastinate function does inside the to-do app. It says go through everything and procrastinate. So how do you procrastinate an individual function? Well, it's quite simple. You take the due date and you call the function add days. And I'm probably going up here to remember the parameters. So the date first, then the number of days. Okay, so here we go. Here's the date. And the number of days, well, it's always going to be 1. And that's it. Yes, it really was that simple. It was just the one thing. Okay, so let's hopefully I save this and we take a look and see whether or not everything is functioning. Okay, so probably saved, reload, and as you click on the procrastinate, hopefully we'll see the dates all change. Okay, and it did. Everything went forward by 1, including the one that was completed, which was a little bit funny. Okay, and really it kind of doesn't make any sense that completed tasks could be procrastinated because, well, they're already marked as being done. So I didn't ask for this in the test, but it's probably a reasonable thing to add. Okay, so I'm was trying to debate about where to put it, and really I think it's something that belongs up here. So it's quite simple. All we're going to check is we're going to see whether or not it is complete. Okay, well, I guess, okay, so surprise, if it's not complete. Okay, so if the task isn't complete, then here's what I'm going to do is I'm going to procrastinate it by adding 1 to the date, otherwise nothing else. So now this time when you try procrastinating, you'll see that the completed quiz, which is marked off, that actually has not gone forward. Okay, and I believe that I also clicked forward a few more times just so I can show the wraparound from 1 month to the next. For example, you can see March 31 goes forward to April 1st. Okay, and you can see in the bottom the April ended up going into May. So yes, this works, and even if we crossed into a day, it would have, or crossed a month or a year would have worked, and even leap years would have also worked. Okay, so probably back to the document. The next part up was the thing called priority sort. Okay, so, no, sorry, a no delay type. Sorry, I'm reading forward a little too far. Okay, so let's take a look at the no delay type. So no delay types are simply tasks that would ignore the procrastination. So here's the type called no delay. Okay, there's at least a couple of them in here. Okay, because obviously you can't procrastinate the completion of the test. You shouldn't procrastinate paying of your phone bill because then you'll be cut off. Okay, and I said go off and make this brand new class called a non-delay type. Okay, so let's go here into the source code and add a non-delay task, which of course extends a task. because, well, it would have all of the same properties. Okay, in fact, it's exactly the same. Okay, but we certainly want a constructor, and guess what? Because it has all the same properties, I figured maybe I should just keep exactly the same set of parameters. Okay, erase this, paste this. Okay, and what do we do inside here? Well, guess what? Just like anything else, you always have to call your parent's constructor if you're going to create something. Now, what goes into the parent's constructor? Well, it's exactly the ID, the name, the due date, and the priority. Okay, anything else? No, actually, there isn't anything else because that's it. Now, I believe at this point I actually did a quick. Oh, sorry, no, because we haven't actually made use of it yet. So, down to the load data. You see here, we were always assuming everything was of a type task. Now we start having to ask questions about what type of task it is. Okay, so yeah, you can see I've typed the word task here. Yes, I remembered as I was recording this, I made several mistakes, so probably what I'll do is I'll just mute myself right now, and I'll wait until everything is fixed. So at least you didn't have to listen to me say, how come it didn't work? How come it didn't work? Okay, so I'll just mute myself and you can watch me make the mistakes and eventually correct it. I'll be back in a few seconds. Now, don't you feel like yelling at me and saying, hey, line 121 is not task, it's supposed to be data? Okay, and you also watch line 122? I've given it the wrong type. Eventually I discovered, it's like, hey, how come it doesn't work? Oh, okay, well, where exactly? Mm-hmm. Oh, there it is. Yeah, that should have been data. But of course, then what did I type? I typed the word date. Excellent. But I managed to type the word data here. Okay, so you reload and you go, oh, date. It's like, what am I doing? Oh, there it is. Okay, data. Okay, let's try again. Look, you see, there's even more stuff. A no delay task. And then you go, wait a minute, no delay? Wasn't it called non delay? And of course, well, at this point, you can't remember where anything is. Okay, there it is, non delay task. Okay, hooray. Okay, I think we're back again. Okay, so finally, everything is, and of course, what I'm doing is I'm checking to see whether or not I've got the right types of things. Okay, but you know, at this point, if I actually click procrastinate, everything will still continue to go forward because we're not actually making use of it yet. Okay, so back into here, and now this is going to make you very frustrated if you did not have this. Okay, so take a look at what I'm about to do. There is a function called procrastinate in the task. Let's create the procrastinate function here. Okay, and what am I going to put? Well, watch this. Do nothing. Okay, you see, for once, it's do nothing, you get the points. So basically, by putting nothing here, it means that if I call the non-delayed task procrastinate, nothing happens. So for once, doing nothing is actually the correct solution, which is funny because that's exactly what procrastination means. So reload, and now you take a look at the first thing as I click the button. You notice that everything else is changing, but that has not gone forward. And also paying the phone bill isn't changing because it's also a non-delay. But you see the marking is complete, still works. Okay, so I think finally I've reached the end. So now I'll go back to the regular stuff where I'm actually describing what I'm doing while I'm there. Okay, so sorry for the messed up version of this audio. Hello. Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that. I need to take at least a little bit of a break. All right, so over to our next part. Okay, so there's our non-delayed type. Okay, here we go. Priority sort. Okay, so this one was left as a surprise, but you know what? We had actually kind of done this type of thing before. Okay, so down here, I've already given you this thing called sort priority. Unfortunately, a number of students ended up doing exactly this. And they said, well, let's call it according to priority and put a priority here. Okay, so this one will take a few extra seconds, and let's see whether or not this works. Okay, back over to here. Let's reload it. Okay, sorting by task names, no problem. Sorting priority. Hey, good. Look, all the highs are above the lows. Perfect. I must be finished. Not quite. Please. Uh, Notice that there are some medium things in here. Let's take this one and actually change it to be medium. And if you sort by priority now, you end up with the highs first, the lows, and then medium at the bottom. That's not the correct order of sorting. Okay, so sorry, it was a little bit more involved than that. Okay, how can we actually go about this? Okay, well, this is kind of similar to the types of things that we did with the sorting of the days. Um, there's a few different ways how to do this. If you were able to get the thing to sort correctly, I gave the marks for it. Um, so there were some very unique solutions to them. In some cases, maybe it was quite complex, but it's okay. It was completely fine. Okay, I think sorting according to priority, this is kind of my preferred approach. So some people when added a new priority number field to each of the objects, and I said, well, it's too bad that you added it. I didn't take any marks for it because it is a valid solution. But this is probably more likely what I would end up doing. Let's have a brand new function called priority to value. Okay, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass in a name and I'm going to return back a number. Okay, so very simple. If name happens to be equal to the word hi, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to return the number 3. Okay, and I'll say if name is equal to the word medium, then what I'll do is I'll return the number 2, and finally if it's anything else, that's a return. Okay, here we go. And finally at the end, regardless what else it is, I'll just return a 1. Okay, so that's what I've decided to do. I'll turn highs into 3s, mediums into 2, and finally everything else will be turned into 1. As long as nobody misspells anything, everything should be all right. All right, so let's go down here. So what I'm talking about for doing my sorting, all that I would need to do is take T1s, or sorry, the function is called, no, I can't even remember what I called the thing up here. Okay, sorry, priority to value. Okay, so priority to value. T1's priority, and we'll subtract priority to value T2's priority. Okay, so you see what I've done is I've just turned it into an integer and I'm simply doing a subtraction. All right, let's go over here. Sort by task name, sort by this is no problem. Sort by priority. Okay, it's in order, but it's exactly the opposite order for what I need. So quite simple. It just means my conversions are backwards. So let's take T2 and T1. Okay, so now if we sort by priority, you get the highs at the top, mediums in the middle, and low at the bottom. And you might say, well, how come I didn't leave in a medium priority task so that it reminds you? Hey, remember, when you're doing programming, you have to not only deal with the data that you've got, but you also have to remember for the other data which is not there but could potentially be there. And of course it was actually there, it just happened to be one of those commented out lines. Okay, so off to our next one. Okay, grouping of the date. Okay, yeah, this one is a little bit tricky, and that's why this is down towards the bottom. I think I had 1 or 2 students actually give me a reasonable attempt at this, but unfortunately what I didn't get is I didn't get students who did both the grouping of the date and the recurring tasks. Some students did this, some students did this, and unfortunately a bunch of students didn't do either. So that was a bit disappointing that I didn't get everybody at least attempting on something. Okay, in any case, let's come down here and take a look at this grouped date. Now, a couple of things about this. You'll see that my showing of the list, if it happens to be of date format, and I've already done this, okay, it says sort date, followed by showing the date grouped. Okay, well, here's the first thing. Guess what? You need to sort the entire list first before doing anything. And you know what? I've got this sort name. Sorting a date, if you remember, is actually pretty simple. Because we're using that day, or the year, month, day format, and everything happens to have padded zeros, it happens to work out exactly right. Okay, so by clicking on this sort date right now, it will actually sort everything according to its due date. Okay, so let's actually go and try it. Group date. You won't see it because, well, we haven't actually printed anything yet, but if you pop open the actual list of tasks, this should be sorted. There's 13, 15, 15, and this is April 15th, so this is actually being sorted. It just hasn't shown anything. Okay, so what do we need to do to actually make it show? Now, if you wanted to, you could always show it on grouped, and at least you would know whether or not it was working. So let's actually try this. This show ungrouped, so just a normal show. Oops, sorry, wrong window. Okay, reload this. If you group according to this, you can see, or sorry, group, but sort according to the date, everything is fine. So all my sort buttons are working. The only thing that's not working is I'm not getting, when I hit this group, I'm not getting the date groups. Okay, so how on earth do you do one of these date groups? Okay, before I get confused, let me get rid of this, show date grouped. All right, I think the easiest thing to do is to copy and paste this entire, sorry about that, is to copy and paste this entire function down here so that now I can go through. All right, now the secret here is that occasionally there's an extra, so sometimes there is an extra row of date. Okay, it's just a simple super wide date row. So here's what I've decided I'm going to do. I'm going to have an extra variable called current date, and I'm going to make it equal to just blank. It could also be undefined. It would have been fine. And what I'm going to do right here is I'm going to ask if task current date, or sorry, task due date is not equal to the current date, then I'm going to do insert a separator row. Okay, what do I mean by inserting a separator row? Well, it's going to look like this. Okay, so what does a separator row look like? Well, this would be a TR, and inside we'd have a TD, maybe with a call span of 4 items. And by the way, my little demo, you could have right-clicked and taken a look at the values in there to know exactly what it should look like. And all I'm going to say is that the due date, and we'll actually print out the word task.due date, okay, and end of TD, end of TR. Okay, and of course what I'm going to do is I'm going to say that now the current date is equal to task.due date. Okay, so what am I doing here? I'm saying that if the task due date is different than the current date, I spit out one of the separator rows. Anything else that's got the same date will not get one of these separator rows. Okay, now the only other thing that would probably make this look a little bit better is you see I've also included this thing here called date group, which would end up doing which would end up sending a background color of blue. All right, so where could I put that? Well, I got a couple of spots where I could put it. I will put it upon the entire row, and we'll call it. Now, what did I call it? I called it a date group. So class date group. All right, I would not have taken any marks off if you didn't have the format correct. Okay, let's go over and see if we've got what we're looking for. Okay, perfect. So now you can see this entire row now consists of one TD with that particular class, and you can see things like the 15th of March happens to have two things together, and if you want you can go and add some extra test values to make sure everything is working. Okay, so we're almost there. The only thing left now is the thing called a recurring task. Okay, so a recurring task is simply something that keeps happening every time. Okay, so you can see here that this particular task called go to gym happens every 3 days. Okay, now how on earth do we go about doing this? Well, you see, first of all, I did comment this out because it happened to conflict with the format. Because now take a look, you can see the recurring number of days happens to be position 0, 1, 2, 3, but you see everywhere else these are 0, 1, 2, 3. It happens to be the priorities. So that's why I commented it out until we had enough other stuff working. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make a new class down here. So a class is going to be called recurring task, which once again extends a task. Okay, now we are going to need ourselves a constructor. Okay, a couple things about the constructor. Let's just grab this one. Okay, the thing that's missing about the constructor is there's also a repeat Okay, so I'm going to have this extra thing called a repeat, which is the number of days things are going to be repeated, which means that, hey, you know what? I'm going to have this other thing here called repeat. So now my recurring task has an ID, a name, a due date, and a priority that I got from extending the task. And I also have this extra thing called repeat. Now, in order to create a recurring task, I first of all start by creating a task. Okay, and then I simply say this dot repeat is equal to the parameter called repeat. Okay, and everything is done. Okay, now, do I have to worry about procrastinating? No, it turns out recurring things can be procrastinated. That was not a restriction. Okay, if it was a restriction, then you would override this procrastinate and do nothing again, just like I did last time. Okay, so now that's the first thing. Second thing, before we even get into how these things work, let me get into my to-do, my load data, and of course, well, guess what? I've got another one. So if data at 2, oops, okay, if data at 2 happens to be recurring, then I've got some new stuff to make. All right, so let's copy and paste this whole thing down here, but we're not talking about a non-delay task. Now we're talking about a recurring task, and we've got a couple of things that have to change, because remember, the priority now is not number 3. I believe now the priority is number 4, and the repeat happens to be at data number 3. Okay, and finally, if it was incomplete at data number 5, okay, we push this in. Okay, so we mark it complete, and of course that's also number 5. Okay, so that's my first test, is just to find out whether or not I've got the data being loaded correctly, because, well, like everything else, we can certainly have a lot of troubles. Okay, so do we have any recurring tasks? Yes, we do, so at least we got the right type. Does it make sense? Okay, TID 11, task name, go to Jim, due date is the 15th of March, priority is medium, and complete date is undefined. And let me take a little look here, and it says repeat at string 3. Whoops. You know what? I think life would probably be a little bit nicer, I believe, if I typecast this into a number. Okay, so let me go and throw this into a number. Let's load this again and see if this will end up making my life a little bit easier. Okay, so my recurring task. Okay, now I've got an actual number here. All right, down here, this also works exactly a 7-day interval for the clean car. Okay, perfect. And completion date is also undefined, which it always has been. The completion dates, okay, so we don't know for sure because none of the recurring tasks had a completion date already set, but hopefully everything works out for me. Okay, oh, well, let's actually give this a try. What if I go and try to clean a car? Yes, it does actually get marked off as being complete. Let's take a look at what's hiding inside the actual application as the very final one and make sure that its completion date, yeah, you can see it actually got marked off today. So obviously this is Sunday that I'm recording this. So that's been marked off as complete. So my tasks can still be marked as complete and incomplete. It just happens to be that the behavior is not quite correct yet. Okay, so now back over here to my Word document. Take a look at my suggestions. So I said uncomment the recurring entries. By the way, I did not give you any points for this if you didn't actually have a functioning task. No, you don't get points for just uncommenting things. You did need to create this recurring task, but there's a couple of things that need to happen. Okay, here's my idea. When you mark things as being complete, if it happened to be a recurring task, I wanted a brand new task returned back to the caller. Because if you take a look at, say, my mark complete for a generic task, okay, so here's the task class, mark complete, returned undefined. Okay, so in other words, there's no new task to replace this one. But instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down here and I'm going to have this thing called mark complete. And it takes a parameter, which is the completion date. And here's what I'm going to do. All right, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to call super mark complete. Now, why did I do this? Well, that's because there are things that need to happen. Okay, what needs to happen? Well, the completion date needs to be set. Okay, so fine, so it's done. Could have I just said super.complete date is equal to the current date? Yes, I could, but if it's already done somewhere else, why not let the other thing already deal with it? But now, as a result of completing a recurring task, here's what we need to do. Let me have something called NT, which is an abbreviation for new task. All right, let's create a brand new recurring task. Okay, so what do we require as parameters? Well, okay, first of all, I need the ID number. Oh, hey, ID number. ID number. Is our ID numbers of recurring tasks actually working? Yes, it is. Okay, perfect. So everything was set. But our new ID number, I actually don't know it because I'm simply a task. I know that I have an ID number, but I don't know what number to put there. And no, the answer is you don't take your previous one and add one to it because you don't know whether or not those IDs are in use. Those IDs belong to the to-do app, not to the recurring task. Okay, so I have no choice. I'm going to leave this as a -1 for right now. Okay, but I certainly need a name. Well, guess what? It's going to be exactly the same as before. It's still my task name. The due date, okay, I'm just going to call it new date, and I'll be back to that in a second. The priority is still the same old priority, so it's this priority, and the repeat is still this repeat. Okay, so now the only thing that's missing is what about the new date? Okay, well, let's have new date. Well, the new date is actually not that difficult because if you remember, I've got this function called add days so that I can take the current due date and I can simply add this repeat to it, and that would give me the new date. Okay, so from here, I make a new task and I'm going to return NT. Now, the only thing that I don't really like about this is I had to put a -1 placeholder in here because I have no idea what the number should be. Now, one of the things I could have done is I could have put a parameter in here, but then I would have had to add a parameter up here as well, and I don't really like that. So I think I'm just going to take this approach and I'm going to return the new task as the function. So this means that I have to come back down here to my complete task and I have to start asking some questions. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to pick up that return value, okay, after marking it complete, and I'm going to ask the question, if ret, now, of course, what does this mean? That means if ret does not equal to undefined. If not undefined, okay, sorry, forgot this one right here. Okay, so if not undefined, so yes, if the return value comes back as something, what do you need to do? Well, the first thing I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to take the TID and I'm going to make it equal to this current ID. Okay, and I'm going to say this current ID plus plus, so I get the next one. Okay, and finally what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go to this task list and I'm going to push the RET into the task list, and then I'm going to show the entire list. Okay, so first of all, let me cover this and then I will have a quick discussion about this. Okay, let's find out. If I clean the car today, 1 week later I should get a brand new one, and well, it seems to be making fun of me with some na-na-na-na-nas. Okay, what did I end up doing? Okay, well, let's go and find out what happened. First of all, did that actually pop in this way? I would say that my brand new my add days didn't work. Did I misspell something? This due date, this, repest. Okay, let's see if that's any better. Okay, clean the car. Okay, that's a little bit better. That's exactly 7 days later. And I believe that this go to gym was 3 days later, so expect the 18th. And sure enough, that shows up this way. Now, of course, well, we don't show it this way. We show it grouped. Let's pay the phone bill. Hey, that's just a one-time deal. Let's clean the car. And of course, we get ourselves a brand new day. Let's clear that off a couple of times. And yeah, there's a couple of funny looking things. It looks like this overall viewing is not really working that well. Let's see, clear. Okay, so this is working. It just looks like that grouping didn't quite work a second ago, unless I was clicking on the wrong button, but this is at least working. Other than this irritating thing, you can never actually finish the job of going to the gym. Well, I guess maybe that's true in life and we shouldn't be finishing that job, but at the moment we certainly don't want to be doing it. Okay, so there we go. There's the end of the end of the solution. It was a little bit slow because I've walked through because I was walking through the explanation of what I was up to. Oh, right. And now that I'm looking back here, let me just talk about this one thing. Okay, down here, this is the only thing that I don't really like about this solution that we've got right now. Okay, take a look at this. Down here, I pick up this brand new return task that I'm going to push in, but unfortunately I need to know the TID. And what I've done is I've gone through and I've grabbed hold of the TID directly. There's probably better ways, like turning this into a property would have been an improvement. Having a function called setTID or new TID would have been a whole lot better. Okay, but that's okay. We've just gone ahead and we actually stepped into this thing directly for this one particular case. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I have to take a break again for a second. Then I'll be back and I will have a couple of small exercises for you to do that I will explain what it is that I want you to do. So back in a second. And welcome back. What I've decided to do for this is I've actually written this up as a small document, so you will find a copy of this document on D2L. Okay, and I'll also just very quickly go through what I've got here. Okay, so what I want you to do is if you have not gotten your test number 2 completely finished, I want you to go back and I want you to finish that first, because the more practice you do on these things, the easier it's going to be to make the next types of tests. Okay, you don't get anything by looking at somebody else's solution and saying, "Yeah, okay, I understand that." Okay, so you see, even me giving you the answers to these things, unless you were really, really close, me showing you answers and how I arrived at them has limited benefits. So you really need to do more things other than just following along with what somebody else has done. So this is why I'm adding a few extra things for you to do. Okay, so please go back and finish it. You have the solution. I've walked through everything. Okay, I'm just going to let you actually go and actually try it. In fact, I would suggest you close up my video after watching it and try to finish the exercise on your own. That'll be much better than just copying exactly what I've done. Okay, so here's what I want you to do. This particular program, the task completion thing, that would be very, very helpful if you were to go off and learn how to delete tasks. Like what I'm talking about is maybe put a trash can icon here at the end or a delete button that you can click on and actually get rid of it, because things like going to the gym, maybe eventually you just want to stop. Okay, so of course the deletion of something, it doesn't matter what type it is, it should just go away. Okay, so that would actually delete the entire thing. All right, so there's one. Second thing, I want you to create a brand new type called confirm completion task. Here, we'll actually call it task. Okay, so what this is a type of task that when you try to mark it off as being done, it's going to bug you and say, are you sure you want to mark this as complete? Okay, so some kind of a pop-up message. Here's a hint. JavaScript has this feature called confirm. You can do a search on the internet to learn how to use this. I want you to actually ask the user, are you sure you want to do this? Before actually deleting it. I would suggest, now there's a couple of ways of doing this. I think probably the best thing to do is I think all of the tasks need to be refactored to include a new method such as confirmation required, and that could return either a true or false. And so all tasks, regardless of what type they are, would return either true or false. Most of them would return false because no confirmation is required, but return a true because you actually want to ask. So the place to put the confirm message is not inside the task; it's to put it inside the to-do app. Okay, so there's my hint. So please don't put it inside the task. It actually doesn't make any sense. User interaction inside a task, it doesn't really make for useful or reusable code. Okay, I also want you to create a brand new class called a completion log. Okay, so remember in the parking lot, I asked you to add a log at one point. This is about the same thing, except this time I want you to do it in a slightly different way. I want you to create a completion log, and I want you to have that completion log do absolutely nothing, except I want you to have an empty method called log event. Oh, well, you're going to need some parameter in here. Okay, what kind of parameter? Well, probably the name of the event and when it was marked off and whether or not it was cleared or uncleared. Okay, but I don't want this function inside the completion log to do anything. Okay, so it's empty. Then what I want you to do is I want you to create a brand new class called a local log. So what on earth is a local log? Well, it is a type of a completion log, and all that it does is it stores all of the events in an array locally. Okay, so yes, you take the message E and you push it into an array so that you can look at it later. Yes, certainly add a button that allows you to view it. Okay, so now why on earth did I get you to do this and not just add the stuff inside the completion log? Actually, what I wanted you to do is I want you to create this completion log because a completion log that does nothing but it has a function actually has a very important name. Okay, the name is something called an interface. Okay, you're going to see this when you take the next programming course, and when you take the C# course, you're going to see the word interface will appear in a few different spots. Okay, so why on earth am I getting you to do this? There is no real interface in JavaScript, but I want you to implement it this way anyway, because what I'm going to do is next week I'm going to show you how to actually send that data to a different computer. Okay, so it's going to be called a remote log. And of course, the idea is that if your to-do app knows about completion logs, then it will also won't have to be made, nothing will have to change in order to have a remote log set up. Okay, so that's going to be a refactoring. So here's a hint that will come back next week. And if you implement this completion log the way I just suggested, no extra work is going to be required, or at least very minimal work. Okay, so that's what I want. Okay, now as I mentioned in the news posting, I have to start asking you guys to submit some stuff. This is mostly just to make sure that everybody is actually doing some work. So I'm going to open up a Dropbox for this piece of work. I won't be evaluating it. I won't be assigning points. This I'm simply using to find out whether or not all of the students are actually doing something. Okay, so I'm not going to go and review anything unless there's a specific call saying, could you please check this to make sure it's okay? And at that point, I will take a quick peek at it to make sure everything is fine. But if I don't see any messages, I'm just going to say, okay, fine, it's done, and I'm going to carry on. So of course, the idea is that if we go through an entire week and I don't see anything submitted to this Dropbox, then chances are you'll probably get an email from me asking if everything is all right. Okay, so that's I've been asked to do that, so this is how we're going to proceed. So it doesn't have to be functional. I certainly encourage you to have everything functional, but please at least upload something so that I know that you're at least watching the videos and that you're making the attempts at the material. Okay, so that ends this lesson. I'm sure that was probably about an hour. So sorry that ended up taking so long to go through the full explanation, but I hope if you had some troubles with the test that at least you understand what's going on now with the class extensions. Okay, next lesson is going to be more of the same, except we're going to do a full design of a small system, and then I'm going to do a little bit of an implementation, and I'm going to leave it for you to finish the next part of the implementation. Okay, so check out the next video. See ya.